And hello YouTube, this is Thomas Judge, back once again with another YouTube reading guide series. Today is video 11 in my 14 video series, walking through the correct reading order of Superman by DC Comics. To create this Superman reading guide, I have read the 1,677 single comic issues, comprising the entire Superman shared universe continuity from 1991 and the launch of Man of Steel issue 1 up until 2011 and the advent of the Flashpoint event. That means I've included all the essential spin-offs, tie-ins, miniseries, maxi-series, and event issues, and I've used that knowledge to build the internet's most detailed reading guide for the world's most famous superhero. As you'll know over the last few videos, this guide has been taking the form of a Google Sheet that is split into 14 tabs representing the 14 discrete eras I've split this period of Superman reading into. This guide can be viewed and downloaded for free from my website, and generally each era or tab is separated by a major DC event that I'm also releasing a separate video on. Now this playlist that you're currently watching will contain every single Superman video and every single DC event video in chronological order. However, if you're only interested in the DC events, they will also be collected in a dedicated 11 video playlist that will be available separately on the channel. One thing I will stress is it would really massively help you and help everyone if you could watch the introductory video to this series. The introductory video to this series is one that will cover a lot of key and important concepts, such as explaining why I start this reading guide in 1991, what I mean when I talk about Type P and Type J readers, and what I mean when I talk about triangle issues. Although, admittedly, for this video, the 11th era of my reading guide, that triangle bit isn't necessarily as relevant. With no further ado, let's have a look at the guide here. This, ladies, gentlemen, and others, is the Google Sheet. This is the guide, and this is the 11th era thereof. We're going to go through this row by row, line by line, like we have previously, and in so doing, we're going to be covering 93 issues that go from March 2004 to April 2006. In other words, they go from the end of the 10th era, which we finished off last time, and that was set directly after the event Joker's Last Laugh. And then today's issue takes us from the end of that 10th era all the way up to the Infinite Crisis event. As I always say, let's go through it row by row, line by line. Each row only has one entry, and then the next row is the next thing you should read after it. Of course, you'll be familiar that I've got some notes floating above every single cell that's relevant. In this case, it's the first one here, and you'll find them sort of dotted around if you were to download the guide as well. Let's start off here with the first part of the 11th era. Now, this isn't one of the normal series we're used to. It's not Action Comics, Adventures of Superman, or Superman, keeping in mind, of course, that Man of Steel is a series that's now finished. There is a limited maxi series, 12 issues, issues 1 to 12, called Superman Metropolis, and I would strongly recommend reading that entire maxi series in its totality here at the beginning of the 11th era. Now, the 10th era ended with an event called Future Smiths. At least that's what I called it. And you might feel that because it ended on a bit of a cliffhanger that you want to carry on with that. Don't. Please do read Superman Metropolis. And the reason for that is that when we go here to the first arc of this new era, the 11th era, what we'll find is that actually Superman isn't in this arc. This doesn't continue directly on from the Future Smiths arc, even though it feels like it should. This arc is called Strange New Visitor, and it includes, in the following order, Action Comics 811, Adventures of Superman 624, and then Superman 201. I've got some quite lengthy notes here on the Google Sheet, but fundamentally the important thing to keep in mind is that this is a great 3-issue arc featuring the character of Majestic, who's from the Wildstorm universe, and it has him in the lead role instead of Superman. In fact, at this point, Superman is missing. It's unclear why at this point in the story, but as we'll find out momentarily, is due to the cliffhanger ending of the Future Smiths arc. So this arc begins with Metropolis caught in a devastating time storm. Now, this was never previously mentioned, but don't worry, don't think that you've missed something here. The story literally starts in media res without any explanation of where this time storm came from. The only other thing to mention is that Jimmy has a new girlfriend, and as mentioned previously, this is from the Superman Metropolis maxi series. That's why you need to read that before you read this. These 3 issues for Strange New Visitor are collected in a trade paperback from Wildstorm called Strange New Visitor. That also collects Majestic issues 1 to 4 of a limited series that's 4 issues long as a Majestic story. There's no need to read that 4-issue Majestic story, although it does have some great scenes in it with Superman, the JLA, Green Lantern, the Eradicator, and so on. Now, that 4-issue series then leads seamlessly into a later 18-issue Majestic arc written by Dan Abner and published by Wildstorm. I own it. I highly recommend it. I haven't yet done a Wildstorm reading order, but that particular bit of it, Strange New Visitor, is a lot of fun. Okay, with that out of the way, let's have a look at the arc Godfall. Now, Godfall is the following issues. There's Action Comics 812, 625, Superman 202, then Action Comics 813, Adventure of Superman 626, and then Superman 203. Each one of these has a different backup story, and again, you'll see there's note text clarifying exactly what that backup story is. I'll go through them one at a time. Issue 812 has a backup story called My Heart, which is a story of Lana Lang talking to Ma and Pa Kent. Adventure of Superman 625 has a backup story which is called Ode to Patsy Cline. It's a short but quite funny Metropolis SCU vignette. The backup story to Superman 202 is actually a prologue to the subsequent Brian Azzarello series Luther, which is sort of like part of his trilogy of stories of Luther, Joker, and Batman Damned. Then we have Action Comics 813. The backup story here introduces the character of Gog, that's G-O-G, who we will see in a later arc very soon. Adventure of Superman 626 has got a backup story called Small Hours, Long Days, which is a very sweet vignette about Lois missing Clark very much. And then the final 6th issue of Godfall is a backup story, which is a 6-page Jim Lee sketchbook, basically. He's just promoting the For Tomorrow story arc, which again we'll be covering in a couple of minutes' time. Overall, Godfall follows directly on from the end of Future Smiths, which was Superman issue 200, and is set in the bottle city of Kandor. It's drawn by Michael Turner and a bunch of other Aspen artists, which essentially makes it one of my favourite Superman stories of all time, because I'm a sucker for Mike Turner art. And this arc introduces the villain Prius, not to be confused with the car. I still don't really fully get what's going on here. Like, what's the deal with Kandor? Is it from Krypton? Is it not? I don't really understand, but hey, there we go. What we have next, as you can see here, is a bunch of decoupled arcs. Now, these 3 lines for this decoupled section are fascinating, at least to me. To start off with, we're going to ignore this one. We're going to ignore the Superman arc, or the Superman thread here, for reasons that become apparent in a moment. Now, these other 2 lines, so that's Action Comics and subsequently Adventures of Superman, they seem to fit within continuity. But however, they also have a dual junction point, as I'm calling it, in issues Action Comics 821, this one here, and also an issue Adventures of Superman 631. Now, in both of those issues, you'll notice this kind of like blue linkage I've put here, which we've never seen before anywhere on this Google sheet. The reason for that is that there is a dramatic event that happens in this issue, and by this issue I mean each of these issues, involving Lois. And if you're reading one of them, you'll come across this dramatic event, and then that will kind of tee you up for knowing it happens in the other series. So whichever one you go for first, you will come across something that happens in both of them. In addition, they also have various explicit arcs within them that are actually part of larger implicit arcs, and we'll talk about those in just a second. Finally, it's worth noting that Adventures of Superman, so right at the end here, Adventures of Superman has got a couple of issues that we're going to be skipping. So you'll notice we're skipping issue 639 there for various reasons that we'll talk about in a second. I'm going to pull those in here and you'll see what I mean. Before I go any further and I dive into the video, one thing I do want to point out is you do need to read this. This is Identity Crisis. And whilst it's not an event per se, it's kind of like a mini event or a closed maxi series, it's really important to the DC continuity and it's really important you read it here. So what is Identity Crisis? Identity Crisis is a 7-issue event, as I said, that's published by DC from June to December 2004 and written by Brad Meltzer. Meltzer, at this stage, isn't really very experienced in comic book writing. He's much more of a kind of a detective murder mystery sort of writer in terms of novels. And that's essentially what this is, essentially a murder mystery which itself serves as a vehicle to unravel the relationships in the DC universe. One of the major consequences of Identity Crisis is the breakdown of the relationships within the Justice League of America, as well as increasing antagonism between Batman and the heroes. And this miniseries is a really key, important prelude to the crossover event that we'll be talking about tomorrow, which is Infinite Crisis. Okay, back to the reading guide here. We have our three different lines of Superman. Let's go through them one at a time. I want to start off with Action Comics, which we can see here. And again, you'll notice that on Action Comics, quite a lot of these have little notes floating above this. So what I'm going to start off with is Action Comics 814. It's a standalone issue, although it does hint at a new Doomsday development that we're going to see soon enough. In Action Comics 815, this is called Superman vs. Gog Part 1. We mentioned Gog earlier in one of the backup stories we just talked about in Godfall. Note that this character Gog is not explicitly the same anti-hero Gog from the story Kingdom Come at this point. And so he can be viewed as a one and done villain, sort of villain of the week at this stage. However, in the next part of this arc, so in the next few issues, he's established very firmly as the Gog from the story The Kingdom, but not from the original Kingdom Come. It's worth keeping those in mind. If you're not sure what The Kingdom or Kingdom Come are, the stories written by Mark Waid and Alex Ross, respectively. They're excellent stories. Google them. You should really check them out. Anyway, that's Action Comics 815. Then we have 816, which is Superman versus Gog Part 2. Then we have 817, which follows immediately on. So 816 ends in a cliffhanger. It goes straight into 817. 817 is a slightly odd issue. One of the Star Labs doctors or scientists in here is really weird and characterized really oddly, and I have no idea why. Answers on the postcard if you do know. Anyway, the story continues on in Action Comics 818. And then 819, which is a great issue. It's mainly Lana and Clark talking, but I really enjoyed it. And it kind of wraps up this implicit arc within this larger story. We then have issue 820, which is pretty self-contained, but has got an epilogue showing Doomsday with a newfound intellect. We'll see him soon momentarily. It then has Action Comics issue 821. So this is the return of Prius. So it's a pretty dark story, ending with an implicit cliffhanger where Prius and John Johns kind of throw down. It also had a two-page scene of that critical moment with Lois, which is actually the entirety of the Adventures of Superman 631. This then has a continuity impact for both series with, well, what happened to Lois sort of continuing on in the subsequent issues. We then have Action Comics 822. So this is an annoying thing. This is an explicit arc within an implicit arc. So this is Repo Man Part 1. And then issue 823 is Repo Man Part 2. That continues with issue 824. And then finally issue 825, which closes out this entire arc of stories. It's very odd with Doomsday featuring in it, lots of time travel featuring in it, and then a giant reset at the end. So whilst it's in continuity, it's kind of a weird story, and it does at least confirm this whole 12-issue run is one linked arc. So that's what's happening with Action Comics. Hopefully that makes sense. Let's have a look at Adventures of Superman. Now, I like to call this little arc Ruined, as far as I can call it. So you see here, this run of comics is called Ruined. This issue is The Battery, Part 1. So this lengthy story arc is written by Greg Rucka and is great. As it says, issue 627 is The Battery, Part 1. 628 is The Battery, Part 2. 629 is The Battery, Part 3. 630 is The Battery Part 4. Now, this has a subtitle which is called Narrative Interruptus Primaris. This story itself, so issue 630, is a terrible, weird cameo from Mr. Mixelpick. So forget fourth wall breaking, this utterly destroys it. It's like Deadpool squared. I didn't enjoy it at all, and you can skip it and you haven't missed a thing. The next issue is The Battery Part 5, which is Adventures of Superman 631. Then we have that closes out the Battery arc. Then we have Adventures of Superman 632. Doesn't seem to have a subtitle. It's a standalone issue, but it's a great issue. Then we go back into a little small story arc. Adventure of Superman 633 is called That Healing Touch, Part 1. Again, if I hover over it, you'll see that there's note text for all of these cells explaining what they're called and various bits and pieces. So everything I'm saying is noted here. Adventure of Superman 634 has got an explicit title of That Healing Touch Part 2. However, this is called Narrative Interruptus Secundus and is another Mr. Mixelpit issue, and again is garbage. You then have Adventure of Superman 635, which is That Healing Touch Part 3. That then continues into a new arc, which is actually Adventure of Superman 636. The explicit title here is The Road to Ruin Part 1. Now, this is not only tied into the Identity Crisis event, which is going on, and I just told you to read, but it also shows Wonder Woman going around with her eyes blindfolded. Now, this is due to events happening in her own series at the time, which actually was also being written by Greg Rucka at the time. And I think it ties into issue 212, but I'm not sure. I haven't read it, cannot confirm. Anyway, that issue then continues on to Adventures of Superman 637, which is called The Road to Ruin Part 2. And then 638 is The Road to Ruin Part 3. This is Narrative Interruptus Tertiaris and is another nonsense Mixelperk issue. Note that, as mentioned before, we are now missing issue 639 because that's part of the next thing we'll be talking about. We go straight to issue 640, which is called The Road to Ruin Conclusion, which has got a great ending. And then we have Adventure of Superman 641, which hasn't got an explicit title, but as far as I'm concerned, is an epilogue to the Ruin story. So there we have it, Adventures of Superman. This particular decoupled arc is, as I said, I call it the Ruined arc. It all kind of goes together if you read it all in one go. Please note that both the Action Comics issues you can see here and the Adventure of Superman issues you can see here are collected in the messiest and most incoherent fashion possible. I've had links in the description to the Superman reading guide and trade paperback collection guide made by Omar on the Name and Condition reading channel. And I would recommend checking out that guide in part 3 for how it's been collected in trade paperbacks. I've given up at this stage at trying to stay close to the arcs as collected in the trades because the trades are collected as an absolute bin fire. If you want to play a drinking game, watch one of Name and Condition's videos on this, and every time he says that the mapping is a mess, take a shot. You will be destroyed by the end of the video. Anyway, little mini rant over. Let's come over here and look at Superman. Now, these issues here, which is Superman issues 204 to 215, are all one single arc called Superman for Tomorrow. This is a story arc drawn by Jim Lee, written by Brian Azzarello. I've done a video for this on my channel talking about unpopular comics that people should like, or I think I said little known comics, in fact, that people should like. And the reason I called it that is that this is actually the sister title to Batman Hush, who everyone knows. Everyone's talked about Batman Hush, but no one talks about For Tomorrow. So if you're interested, check out that video on my channel. For our purposes today, what I'll point out is the situational focus of For Tomorrow was on two events that took place prior to the 12-issue story arc starting point. Now, these events have never been mentioned before, so don't worry at how random and unexpected they feel. You haven't missed anything, even though it feels like it. This is what makes me feel like For Tomorrow is just completely out of continuity, because the first event we have to cover is before issue 204. There's an event called The Vanishing, where 1 million people mysteriously disappear from the planet Earth, including Lois Lane, leaving only ghostly shadows in the place they had vanished. Never knew that before. The second thing you need to be aware of here is that Superman has previously created an alternate reality, which he meant to use as a refuge for the people of Earth in case a tragedy such as the one that befell Krypton was to occur on Earth. When creating this reality, Superman also built robots in the likeness of Jor-El, Lara, and Clark Kent to protect it. However, upon the completion of this alternate reality, he felt it wasn't his place to change the course of a planet's destiny, and he put the entire world in the Phantom Zone and erased his own memory of creating it. God knows why. Anyway, those are two things you have to be aware have happened in this weird semi-out of continuity story. And then keeping that in mind, with issue 204, the For Tomorrow story arc starts. It's told in media res, which means in the middle of the story. And with regard to continuity, please remember there are no prior stories wherein the two events I've just described before are shown. This is Just a weird thing you just have to run with. You have to be type J when you're reading this, otherwise you will not survive Superman for tomorrow. It's worth noting that the idea of Superman moving to a Peruvian jungle to construct a new Fortress of Solitude is a major story arc that's elaborated on prior now to the events of Identity Crisis and Infinite Crisis. Also, this is a personal bugbear, are we just meant to accept that in continuity Lois Lane was presumed dead for 12 months? Like, I like For Tomorrow, I do. The artwork is good and the story is not terrible, but it's just odd. It's just an odd thing. Okay, so those are the decoupled arcs. Let's now get into the rest of the business. Okay, from this point on, all the arcs we're talking about are pretty much tied into the sprawling Infinite Crisis mega event. Infinite Crisis is huge. It was a disaster for me to read, incredibly complicated to map, and in tomorrow's video I'll be talking it through in excruciating detail. But for now, I am just going to check in on the Superman side of that event and the Superman issues. And for this, the 11th era, what we need to talk about is this, which is Story Arc 4, Lightning Strikes Twice. This is involving just 3 issues, Action Comics 826, Adventures of Superman 639, which, as we'll note, we skipped earlier up here. But also keep in mind, this issue 639 does reference the events of Ruined, which isn't helpful in the slightest. That's then followed by Superman 216, which ends saying to be continued in Day of Vengeance. We're going to talk about the Day of Vengeance mini event tomorrow because a key character here becomes villainous right at the end. Just note that this 3-issue arc, which, as I said before, totally interrupts the publishing schedule for the Ruined arc above, is written by Judd Winnick, who I'm quite a fan of. The next arc is this one, Strange Attractors. So this is arc 5 of this, the 11th era. This involves the following issues in the following order. Superman 217. This is Superman's first interaction with an OMAC robot. The cover is branded as an OMAC project tie-in, but I don't really see that. We then have Action Comics 827, which explicitly says it's set after Superman 217. This is a 2-parter called Strange Attractors. This is part 1, and part 2 is Action Comics 828. Now, note that at the end of this issue, Black Adam and Zoom both turn up at the end, which relates to the events of the Villains United mini event series, again part of the Infinite Crisis mega event. This then leads into Superman 218, which specifically states at the end, to be continued in Sacrifice. Here we can see Sacrifice. This Sacrifice story arc is key in terms of reading Infinite Crisis, but I'm going to cover it here as well as covering it tomorrow. The reading order is as follows. Superman 219, this is Sacrifice Part 1, branded as OMEC Project. Then we have Action Comics 829, this is Sacrifice Part 2, again branded as an OMEC Project tie-in. We then have Adventures of Superman 642, which is Sacrifice Part 3. The cover again is branded as an OMAC Project tie-in. We then have, and this is really important, people, Wonder Woman 219. This is Sacrifice Part 4 and is branded again as an OMAC Project tie-in. That is followed by Wonder Woman 220, which is called Sacrifice Aftermath. Now, chronologically, this is set before the next issue we're going to talk about. Actually, it doesn't really matter. Whether you read Wonder Woman 220 or whether you read Adventures of Superman 643, it doesn't really matter which order you read them in, but if you want to be pedantic about it, Adventures of Superman 643 is the Sacrifice Aftermath issue that goes after Wonder Woman 220. Please note that for the Sacrifice event, all the events happening at Infinite Crisis are being referenced casually throughout here. That includes the appearance of the antagonist Brother Eye, an altercation between Superboy and his friends, and the death of a key JLA character. It's all mentioned casually throughout this, so there's not really a perfect order to read this in conjunction with reading Infinite Crisis, and arguably at this stage, rather than reading this, you just want to move over to my Infinite Crisis map. That's entirely up to you. You do you. That then takes us over to the last bit. So we've got the decoupled issues here again. What's happened is Action Comics, Adventures of Superman, and Superman have all kind of untethered from each other yet again. Let's talk them through one at a time. And again, keep in mind, everything that I'm saying, or the key parts of it, will be noted in the note text for every single cell here as well. That said, if you like my mellifluous tones, let me continue. We have Action Comics 813. Black Adam appears here, behaving in line with his role in Villains United. We then have Action Comics 831, which is again branded as a Villains United tie-in. We have Action Comics 832. This is a standalone issue that, for some reason, randomly resolves the Colin Thornton Satanas arc from way back in the 8th era. I've forgotten about this and I did not care about it in the slightest, but it's here. Action Comics 833 and 834 are two parts of the same arc about Queen of Fables. Keep in mind, Queen of Fables were last seen in JLA 47, 48, and 49, so these two issues here relate to her. And then you have issue 835, which is the first appearance of the villain Livewire, and also resolves a cliffhanger with Lois from the previous issue. With that out of the way, let's have a look at what's going on in Adventures of Superman. Keep in mind, you can read Action Comics first, or you can read Adventures of Superman first, or Superman first. I put all three of these on a par because you can just read whichever line you're interested in. Do not worry about it. The sequencing here is just read whatever you want, basically, and relax. If you don't want to relax, then follow my words and follow the way I'm going through it step by step, but honestly, you don't have to. So anyway, here we've got Adventures of Superman 644. We continue to see the after effects of Identity Crisis here. Then we have 645. This is branded Infinite Crisis is here on the cover. Omax appear in this, and it ends with an explicit thing saying to be continued in Infinite Crisis #1. We will cover this in the reading map tomorrow. Adventure of Superman 646 is actually subtitled Rack and Ruin Part 1, and 647 is titled Rack and Ruin Part 2. Personally, I dislike this arc as I think it spoils the ending of the Ruined arc's ending. The Ruined arc, remember, being the one all the way up here. But, you know, I'm not in charge of DC, so they did that and it was a stupid choice. Then we have Adventure of Superman 648, which is also marked as an Infinite Crisis crossover. All right, let's move over to the Superman issues. Let's keep it running here. Superman 220 features an OMAC. Note that at this point, Superman now knows who he is really cloned from. So he actually knows the truth about his heritage. I'm not going to spoil it here, but it's interesting. We then have Superman 221. This is branded as a Villains United tie-in and ends saying to be continued in Action Comics 831. I wouldn't massively worry about that. Action Comics 831 is here, but honestly, it's not a big deal. We'll talk about all this, like I say, tomorrow in the Infinite Crisis reading map. We then have Superman 222, which is branded as an OMAC Project Aftermath. Superman 223 is branded saying Infinite Crisis is here. And 224 and 225 are both branded saying this is an Infinite Crisis crossover issue. We'll talk about the Infinite Crisis is here and Infinite Crisis crossover issues again tomorrow. That finally takes us to This Is Your Life, which is the very final Superman arc of this, the 11th era, and it's in the following order: Superman 226, Action Comics 836, and Adventures of Superman 649. For Superman 226, the cover is marked as an Infinite Crisis crossover. Note the cover for this issue was deliberately designed to appear worn and well read, as if it was an actual comic book from the Golden Age. So if you get it and it looks battered, it's meant to. Don't worry, it's not meant to look mint condition. Action Comics 836 is marked saying it's an Infinite Crisis crossover, and Adventures of Superman 649 is also marked saying it's an Infinite Crisis crossover. Please note it actually says on this one, The Last Adventures of Superman, because it's the last issue for the Adventures of Superman series. And when we come back to this Google sheet, we're only going to have 2 rows, Action Comics and Superman, because Adventures of Superman will have ended. This issue ends also saying to be continued in Infinite Crisis #5, and we're going to talk about that next time. These 3 issues, the This Is Your Life little mini crossover arc between the 3 lines, is all about a battle between different Superman continuities, which sounds complicated and is complicated. There we are. That's the 11th era. I hope that was helpful. I hope it made sense. And come back tomorrow with a very, very strong cup of coffee to prepare yourself for the lengthy and incredibly confusing mega event that is reading Infinite Crisis in single issues. And there we have it. In case you're interested in knowing where these resources are, so the guides, the maps, and so on, they're all available on my website. They're all available for free. You can go into the website, which is nogodsorkings.com, and download the Google Sheet for the Superman reading order, or you can go on the website and look at these reading maps for all the various DC events and a whole bunch of other things I've got on there to your heart's desire. If, however, you are interested in a written version of this guide, then it is available on Amazon. I've recently just self-published it. It is the cheapest possible tier you can get on Amazon. So it's 79 pence UK, 99 cents American, and so on. It's free if you're on Kindle Unlimited, and there is a free sample on the website as well. The reason I put this onto Amazon is kind of a proof of concept. I'm interested to see if people are interested in the written guides, whether or not people want to pick them up. And also, it's a good way for me to bat off all the people that are going to be in the comments asking for a Batman guide. If you want a Batman guide, I don't really particularly have any interest in doing one, but I will do one if this book gets 500 reviews. So if this book gets 500 5-star reviews, then I will start doing a Batman reading guide at some point. I don't think that's going to happen, but there we are. Of course, feel free to support the channel by picking this up. Of course, like, comment, and subscribe. But as always, the best way to support the channel is by picking up one of my other books, which isn't a non-fiction reading guide. It's actually a fictional, completely original superhero story. It's prose, so not a comic or words, but it's about superheroes in just a really interesting kind of post-apocalyptic dystopic idea. The first 4 books of the series are out, and if you want to support, please pick that up. Thanks for watching. Until next time, stay classy.